As we saw in the previous talk, we learned about the yield of organic and conventional agriculture, and we found out that yields can be lower with organic ag than conventional. But there are other things to consider, not just yield, when we're talking about farming systems like organic and conventional. And so if we look at, well, what would those things be that we'd be interested in? We call those metrics of sustainability or metrics of sustainable farming. And there really are four main metrics. And those metrics are adequate yields of high quality. So we know about yields now, but high quality means, well, is the food nutrient dense? Does it have pesticide residues? Another metric is it environmentally safe? Is it economically viable? And lastly, is it socially responsible? So those four parts are really, even though we call them metrics, some people call them goals, that you want to be these, you want to have adequate yields. They're also like legs on a chair. You want to keep the chair in balance, so you want to make sure you're managing or addressing each of the legs well so that the chair is in balance. If you let one of the legs go, the chair's out of balance and it's not sustainable. So for any farm to be sustainable, whether it's conventional or organic or integrated, it must meet each and every one of these four criteria. And when we talk about farming systems, a lot of people think of, well, I know about organic farming and I know about conventional farming, but I've heard there's some other systems, and there are other systems. And if you look at organic and conventional, they're kind of like bookends on a shelf, and in the middle are all these other farming systems like agroforestry, integrated farming systems, which are really hybrid organic conventional systems, sort of using the best of both worlds. They're mostly organic, but they can come in and use synthetic fertilizers and pesticides if needed. Mixed crop livestock systems that grow both crops and livestock on the same farm, most often on the same field. Grass-fed livestock systems, they're becoming very popular, and we're finding out that the meat from those systems is healthier. And conservation ag systems that use no-till practices but also keep the ground covered and rotate, have longer rotations, 3- and 4-year rotations. And those are kind of the systems that fit in between. So there's not just organic and conventional, there's other systems too. But in this talk, I'm really going to spend a lot of time with organic and conventional. And you know from the previous talk about yields, well, what do these studies comparing organic and conventional tell us about all the sustainability metrics, not just yield? So if we look at other productivity variables, we would think of, well, what about pesticide residues, and what about the nutrition of the food? We know, as I mentioned before, lower yields with organic, and they usually average about 10 to 20% lower. But even though lower yields, you have less or no pesticide residues on organic foods. And there have been at least 4 reviews or meta-analyses of all the studies that have been done showing that organic foods have no to very little pesticide residues and always less than conventional. There have also been 17 review studies done, or meta-analyses, that look at just the nutrition of organic and conventional food. So we talk about organic food, we mean produce, grains, milk, and meat. 14 of those 17 review studies have found some evidence of organic food being more nutritious. And in general, those areas are higher concentrations of vitamin C, higher concentrations of total antioxidants and total omega-3 fatty acids. Those are all beneficial. And higher omega-3 to 6 ratios. So those are what we want. The other 3 studies concluded that there were no consistent nutritional differences. That's 3 out of 17. These studies have all been done over the last 16 years. But one of those 3 studies found conventional chicken and pork to have a 33% higher risk for contamination with antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So even though you could argue, well, maybe the jury's a little bit out in the nutrition area, it's really leaning toward organic foods being more nutrition or more nutritionally dense, being healthier. So when we talk about production, lower yields, but no pesticide residues or lower pesticide residues, and more nutritionally dense on the organic. If we go to environmental quality, there have been about 14 reviews or meta-analyses done of hundreds of studies with these hundreds of individual studies with organic and conventional farming, and they really lean toward organic farming being more environmentally sound. If we want to break it down, we could start with the soil. Organic systems have better soil quality and less soil erosion. Organically farmed soils have more organic matter and can store more water, which means if you have more water in the soil, it can ensure higher yields during dry periods. Lands farmed organically are healthier for passing on to future generations. The soil's better. That's what we want for future generations. We want them to have good soil. Environmental quality also includes pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, and energy use. Organic ag has little to no risk of synthetic pesticide pollution of ground and surface waters because it uses almost no synthetic pesticide sources, and so you're not going to get that kind of pollution. But there's other things. What about nitrate and phosphorus leaching and greenhouse gas emissions? Generally speaking, organic farming, they score better than conventional farming, especially when you look at the area of land. So less nitrate leaching, less phosphorus leaching, less greenhouse gas emissions with organic farming per unit land area. Once you do it, some people like to do it on a per production or per yield. Well, since conventional farming gets higher yields, that positive effect for organic farming is less pronounced. Usually organic farming is better, but in some cases that positive effect, it's reversed when expressed per unit product. Organic systems are usually more energy efficient. They use less energy than their conventional counterparts, and that's a big plus for organic. How about biodiversity? Organic farms have higher below and above ground biodiversity, not just above when we think about birds, but also below the soil microbes. More functional, diverse groups such as herbivores, pollinators, predators, producers have been shown with organic systems. More genetic variation with organic systems. Greater faunal diversity, as I mentioned before, birds, insects, soil organisms. And often more habitat and landscape diversity on organic farms. These are what studies are showing us. So when you summarize environment, it definitely favors organic farming systems. How about profitability? And people often want to talk about, when you talk about profitability and organic farming, what about premiums, you know, the higher cost for organic foods, and what about the cost of producing those foods? There has been one meta-analysis done that looked at basically there are 44 studies that are solid, meaning that they're statistically valid, that have been done globally over the last 40 years. When those, basically when you put all those into a computer, apples with oranges, and you look at profitability of those systems, organic agriculture was significantly more profitable, 22 to 35% greater net present value. So you're looking at net returns taking into account inflation. Also, if you don't want to just look at net present values, you want to look at benefit cost ratios, organic farming 20 to 24% higher than conventional agriculture. Yes, organic foods get a premium. 29 to 32% premium goes to organic. That's about a 30% premium. That's the premium that the farmer is getting for selling her or his food. That's not the premium we pay in the store. So on average, over that 40-year period of time, that premium has actually held at about 30%. The interesting thing is, for organic farmers to actually break even, in other words, to have a premium necessary to equal the organic profits, they only need 5 to 7%, so about 6% versus the 30 that they're actually getting. But the interesting thing is we know from just looking at the environmental evidence that those organic farmers are providing great benefits to the environment. And I think that it's actually worth paying that premium, giving the farmers more money for their food because they're providing those benefits to the environment, and they deserve that premium. You look at total cost over that 40-year period of time, not significantly different. However, labor costs are higher on organic farms, about 7 to 13% higher. And that difference is generally made up for by pesticide and fertilizer costs being less on organic farms, so that balances out the higher labor costs. Externalities and ecosystem services. Well, what do we mean by that? Profits don't account for externalities, and they don't account for ecosystem services. So externalities are generally, if they're negative and they're caused by farming, not good. So we're thinking of things like soil erosion, nitrate leaching. Those are negative externalities, but a farmer doesn't have to pay for that. We pay for that as a consumer, and as even being a neighbor. So if you put a price on those negative externalities, that would make organic agriculture even more profitable because organic ag, we've seen, is more environmentally sound. There have only been a few comparison studies, like maybe a handful, that show organic practices. I should actually say there have only been a few comparison studies of organic and conventional farming, a handful of them, that actually look at ecosystem services, in other words, benefits to humans beyond that of farming. And those studies show that organic practices increase the ability of the farms to provide some economically significant ecosystem services. So when I say ecosystem services, it could be they provide more pollination services, better communities for the bees to come to the organic farm, provide more carbon in the soil, that's an ecosystem service. Better soil quality, that's an ecosystem service. And when you take into account those ecosystem services, they more than make up for the price premiums awarded to these organic products. How about social well-being, the fourth leg of sustainability? Well, both organic and conventional ag need to make significant progress in this area. It's the one area when you look at social sustainability goals, are workers being paid fairly? Do they have retirement? Do they have medical? Is it good for the communities? Both systems have a ways to go. However, there have been a few studies done, and it tends to lean toward organic. Organic farming has been shown, for example, to have sociocultural strength. So things like positive shifts in community economic development have been shown when there are a lot of organic farms in a community. There are increased social interactions between farmers and consumers with organic farming. And there's also greater employment of farm workers with organic farming. The other thing is organic farming practices reduce the exposure of farm workers to pesticides and other chemicals. And this can be really important, especially in developing countries where they often can't afford safety gear for protecting themselves from these chemicals. Organic certification programs have been adopting social well-being goals, and that's a start. They're at least starting to look at this. We know organic certified animals have access to open air. They have to. It's part of the certification program. So benefits to animals can be greater under organic systems. We also know that CSAs, community-supported ag enterprise, farmers markets that are dominated by organic systems, those are increasing, and those movements are increasing. They're gaining ground, and that's all positive. All that said, even though organic looks better at the social level than conventional, we have some data for that. Both systems still have a ways to go in that area. So if you take all of these, put them all together, the four major areas of sustainability, and you put them and you make them into a flower, and then you draw petals of the flower, and you look at those flowers, and you look at the petals, and you'll notice that the orange areas would be basically the production, yield, nutritional quality, pesticide residues. The blue would be all the environmental areas. The red would go under profits, total cost, ecosystem services. And the green, the social, which we know the least amount about, but we know something, the social is in green. If you look at that, you want a flower to be fairly even. Remember when I talked about the chair having 4 equal legs, you want the petals to be close to equal length. And if you look at the organic flower, it looks more like a flower. When you look at the conventional, it's out of balance. You'll notice, yes, under yield, and when you look at profits and total cost, those petals are doing pretty well. But the other petals in environment and some of the social and even the pesticide residues under production, those are pretty short, and those could be improved. And that's where organic farming really shines. Now, all this information that I've been talking about is in the paper by Reganold and Wachter. I'm Reganold. The title of the paper is Organic Ag in the 21st Century. It's in the journal Nature Plants, and that's the source. All the references for what I'm talking about are in that review paper. And in contacting me at Washington State University, I can provide you with copies of that paper. Finally, and I'm asked this question quite a bit, well, what about organic farming, and can it help feed the world? You bet. It certainly can. Why? Because it has multiple sustainability benefits. Remember the balancing of the petals on the flower. And organic farming also has room for growth. Only 1% of the cropland today globally is organic. Why can't it be 10, 15% by 2050 or even more? So it has a lot of room to grow from 1% where it is today. And the other answer to that question is, so can other innovative farming systems. They can play a role in helping feed the world. Our best shot at feeding the world sustainably is to look at and use these alternative systems, not just organic, but agroforestry, integrated farming, mixed crop livestock, and conservation ag, and those are just some of them. And with that, that's the end of my talk.